If I'm an advocate for anything, it's to move as far as you can, as much as you can, across the ocean or simply across the river. Walk into someone else's shoes or simply eat their food. A quote by a well-known author, celebrity chef, and a travel documentarian, Anthony Bourdain. My guest today is Arva Ahmed, who knows this only too well because she's been fostering cultural connections with her food trails across the city. Having grown up and lived in Dubai for over 5 decades, I have been a witness to the city's changing landscape. Change, progress comes at a price. So every time there is a demolition of an old neighborhood or a familiar eatery or a bakala, my heart breaks a little. Over 5 years ago, I came across Frying Pan Adventures. I was thrilled because they were transforming the forgotten alleys of the city and its unassuming eateries into a culinary theatre. My guest today, Arva Ahmed, is the founder of Frying Pan Adventures, Dubai's first food and culture tourism company. She's also the co-host of Dubai's first food podcast, Deep Fried, and is a wonderful single mother to a little girl. From the other side, we are in conversation with the very articulate Arva Ahmed. Welcome, Arva.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming. Arva, I'd like to begin with a question that I ask all my guests. When you were growing up, what were the kind of social, cultural, perhaps religious influences that you had that you believe has influenced for you to become the person that you're today?
I think for me, a lot was, driven just by my parents. I feel like growing up in Dubai, our extended community was back home in India.
That's right.
So it was a very tight family of just my sister Farida, myself, and our parents. And my parents, especially my father, is one of those very sentimental sort of people, one who's very tied to his roots without, being overly rigid in any way. And both my parents are very simple, modest people. Like, we were never hung up about the latest, the flashiest, or we need to constantly be upgrading in our lives. That was not the mentality at home. It was always just things were simple. So we have lived in the same building that we lived in since 1989. We moved in from Sharjah. So he's all about advancement and progress. But there is also just a love of keeping things simple, just keeping it basic, and also just living within our means. So that's something, that love for keeping things simple, not needing too much to make us happy, just being modest about what we have. I think that is something that has spilled over for me even now. And I really think that DNA is because of my parents. That's just how we were brought up. Growing up, there was one day of the week that we would go out to eat, which was Friday. And just a simple meal as a family, but I used to be so excited because that is the one day that you're stepping out.
And it was special.
It was special. Yeah. And to date, we have that tradition, that excitement that, okay, we're going to do something. It's so simple. But I used to be excited about those little things. And to date, that is what, I feel like that's determined a lot about my personality even now. Just keeping things really basic, keeping it simple, not complicated. And Frying Pan is a lot about that. So our brand voice is all about celebrating the small, the simple, the humble. And I get from both my parents.
Yeah, clearly so. I mean, this is so interesting once you connect the dots, because keeping it simple is exactly what you do with Frying Pan Adventures. I believe that the soul of any city is in its history. And in many ways, I believe that what you're doing with your brand is keeping that history alive, almost as custodians of the culinary history of the place. So, kudos to you. The year is 2010. by now you've spent about 9 years in US completing your undergrad and master's, and also having done a management consultancy stint in New York. And you decide to return back to the city you grew up in, Dubai. Par for the course would be typically to, given your skill sets and expertise, would be to tread on the path of corporate life. But that isn't something that quite happens. What happens?
Right. So for me, everything was about, I'm going to come back and help dad. Since I was 10, that was the repeated, refrain at home. But in my head, I was like, I have to come back and I want to work with my dad. So I had planned my entire education. Everything was according to that plan. Except that there was something else happening in the background. And this happened only when I left for the US, which is in my college, I started to learn how to cook and actually opened up a cooking service, like a home, like a takeout service for Indian food from the kitchen in my dorm, along with two roommates. At midnight is when we're all hungry. We want home food and there's nothing. So let's do it ourselves. Yes, we do not know how to cook, but it's fine. We'll figure it out and we'll cook for the whole community.
So perhaps the seeds of an entrepreneur started to kind of sow in there.
It began there. Because that's my upbringing. I was never into, hey, let's explore all of the high-end places in Philadelphia. I just was like, I'm on a cheap student budget. I'm going to, live within my means. So I would just hunt out all of these little places. And then it became an obsession, because I would feel, this is a meal. It's not just a meal though, it's an opportunity. And I realized that was giving me a lot of joy.
Right.
The idea of discovering food, discovering an Indian.
And the conversations that would happen in between food tasting.
100%.
And so you come back to Dubai and you start food blogging.
I started food blogging, and it was just supposed to be a side hobby while I was working with my dad. And then I realized I'm thinking about this all the time. And then I went to Delhi on a work trip, and I spotted, in the evening I visited a bazaar, and I spotted another person giving a food tour.
Giving a food tour. Yeah.
I was eating parathe in Parathe Wali Gali, and I turned around and I was like, what is this guy doing? And then he was giving a food tour. And in that moment,
you knew.
I was like, this is it.
So, this is what I find so fascinating, Arva, because I believe most of us are sitting and marinating over that one big idea that we want to launch. But the distance between desire and action is daunting. And here you are with an idea that is perhaps going to create its own category. Because up until then, we had desert safaris for tourism.
Yes.
What I am very keen to know is, what was the trigger for you to therefore pursue this idea?
There's two things. One is when I see something I want, then I'm like a, horse with blinders on, and until I get to that finish line.
Incredible.
That's how I'm built. And I think this is something that I felt like there's a gap here. I love restaurants. I want to take people to these places. I want to showcase a side of the city that's not getting highlighted. That's something I want to solve. And then I can't think about anything else. And I think that leads to the second thing, which is I didn't really have an option, because I couldn't think about anything else. This is what happens to me, which is things become all-consuming in my mind, and until I've solved it, until I've done it, I just can't stop. And this can be actually one of my biggest enemies as well. But when it comes to doing something, it's the best, because I don't need anything else. I know that that's where I want to get. So I'll keep sort of plugging away at it until it's there. And that's basically what happened.
I think it's called grit and determination, Arva. What you've got is incredible, because see what you've created with it. The year now is 2020 and the pandemic happens and brings in a new world order. What are the conversations you're having with yourself? Because clearly for a food tour company, this means bad news.
So just to put it into context, when 2020 happened, I had a child that was at the time, she had just turned 2. I was very, very attached to her. I had taken an extended maternity leave because I had the luxury of Farida, my sister, pretty much taking everything forward, and there was a team. I was in no rush to get back. So when the pandemic happened, I think there's so much trauma people have associated with it. So I don't want to take away any of that.
Sure.
But for me, it took away a lot of the guilt from having this extended maternity leave, because that's basically what it did. I was able to say, okay, the whole world has stopped. And now I get more time with my baby. So from a realistic standpoint, that is actually what went through my head. From a business standpoint, I was never driven by money. I have a business background, so finance is important.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that, you need to run yourself into losses, but we had not borrowed any money. We had been very conservative over the years. So I sat down and I said, okay, how long can I go, with the team that I have and make sure everyone is okay before we burn out? And so I had done that projection because we didn't have enough information. Every day the news was changing.
Yes, and we were living a real-time pandemic. So there wasn't like we had any kind of a benchmark to put ourselves on.
We had stopped doing the tours before the government had imposed the lockdown. Because what happened was I was supposed to be doing a special event tour. And I remember going out into the neighborhood. And as a mother, I just started to feel paranoid. I was like, should I be here? Because then I have to go back home to the baby and I have grandparents at home and all these thoughts. And I said, if I'm feeling this, do I feel comfortable bringing guests out? I don't. In my right mind, I don't. It is not about the money. And I remember emailing out the guests saying, I'm really sorry, but we're going to cancel this tour. And we had very upset guests who said, how unprofessional. And I said, I'm sorry, but all refunds, here we go, but we're not doing this tour. And literally the day of the tour was when the lockdown happened. At that time, what happened was 2 things. Our team was fantastic, and they said, look, let's use this time together, or let's build out another season of the podcast. And that gave us something to work. I think if you were sitting doing nothing, this is when anxiety would have eaten you up. So that's the first thing. And second is we said, look, we have relationships with these restaurants who have nobody to serve right now. We have some of our old customers sitting in different parts of Dubai who want to support these restaurants, but are you going to order 500 dirhams worth of falafel so that the guy has, the incentive to deliver it all the way up? No, not. No. But there are people close enough who actually who've lost their jobs
and need it.
Benefit from the food. So let's connect. Let's be the connector. So we started this, buy a tiffin.
I remember that.
Where people would buy a number of meals.
And that was an incredible initiative.
Selfishly, we had to do something like that so that Sean go mad.
Right.
Because this is what our team is skilled at doing, is we connect people with restaurants. And so it gave our team energy. It gave us that no matter that the tours were not going on, this felt so much more important. Yes.
Again, I'm reminded of an excerpt from a book that is one of my favorite books, 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna West. And it says the point of anything is not what you get having done it, but it is who you become having gone through it. In a way, it's also all about growth. The bad things grow you and so do good things, right? And it's not about how much you get right, but how much you get better. And every experience the good, bad, ugly, wonderful, messy, confusing, do just that. And in the famous words of Joanna Di Salento, the only way to fail is to abstain. And I do believe that this experience of the pandemic has obviously taught all of us at an individual level very specific lessons. Um, it's been a leveler on so many fronts, but in a way we've also grown to become something more. And I'm hoping that if today there's someone out there that's listening to us and is marinating over an idea that they're wanting to pursue, and they're looking at the challenges ahead of them, in the famous way that Nike says it, just do it. Right, just do it. It's been what, about 10 years, a decade of frying pan adventure. So congratulations for that. And you've obviously had a professional journey as an entrepreneur, but just the same, you've also had a personal trajectory. Yeah, so you started 10 years ago. Now that you are a single mother of a little girl, and as much as I feel and I believe that as much as we'd like to believe that we are empowered and emancipated, a lot of our actions, even today, are entrenched within the deep folds of a patriarchal framework that we are accustomed to seeing around us. And as a single mother, the expectations are perhaps that much more. As an entrepreneur, you have your own set of challenges. How then do you, Arva, navigate between the roles that you play?
I think navigate is a very, it's a very elevated word for the very clumsy, the clumsy journey that I'm on. To be honest, it's a lot of just, trial by going through the fire, essentially, is what it feels like most of the time. I don't have a good answer, because every day for me is learning something new. And even though I am a single mother, I feel like I'm so blessed and so privileged to have so much support from the family around me. And one of the people who's truly shown me what it's like to be a mother is actually my dad.
Oh, how wonderful is that?
And, I think as women, sometimes we don't fully value our own time very well. We take ourselves for granted sometimes, especially as a new mother. You go through so much. It's honestly nothing at frying pan, nothing compares, I think, for me personally, to the challenges of becoming a new mother. Yes, it's magical. Yes, it's all of that. That nothing compares to that joy. But let's be clear that it is very, very hard.
It's a lot of work.
Absolutely.
You had said something which I thought was so interesting, and you said that I am a better mother when I have got time not being one. And that lends you a sense of clarity and perspective.
I am not of the previous generation, which is, oh my goodness, you need 100% of your time has to be...
Absolutely.
No.
And sorry, I want to say this too, because I think it's important for those who are perhaps listening to us today. And you said something which I thought was really important when you turned around and said further that you also know that it's okay to ask for help. And I think that's so important, because a lot of us are trying to grapple with everything we've got because we have the superwoman syndrome that we've got to live up to, which are just unrealistic expectations.
I hate the word supermom. Yeah. Whenever someone says that, I say, please
don't say it.
Because you are putting this word out there. Nobody, we all struggle in our own ways.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have those horrible, I've had some very, very low moments that I am not proud about as a mother.
All of us have. All of us have it.
All of us have it. And I think it's okay to be honest about how hard it is.
Absolutely.
My father, who through my journey has always recognized how much, how hard it is to be playing the roles that we play. Saying, Arva, look, you didn't have an easy journey. What can I do? He would always be there to support me. And I don't think everyone has that luxury. But I had that messaging coming from the patriarch in the family.
And that's so refreshing and reassuring on so many levels.
Yes. Our natural inclination is to not ask for help.
Yes.
We don't.
And I think it's important for us to unburden ourselves from these titles and these crowns that are often very subservient in nature that we are put through. So yes, I completely agree with you. Arva, with all pun intended, would you walk us through a frying pan adventure tour? Because again, it's a curated tour. What does that mean?
Sure, I'd love to do that because that is my life. I'll walk you through our longest standing, like our longest running tour, which is our Middle Eastern tour, because that tour happens right under the building that Farida and I grew up in, and that's where we still live. So literally, we are downstairs and we point to our building and say, "This is where we grew up.
Oh,
this
nice.
is where we've been living since the
Nice.
80s."
So that's the one to sign up for as a starting point.
Sort of your beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
And that Middle Eastern tour is all about celebrating some foods that you know, but also foods that you don't know, and also the stories of the Middle East. Because, did you know that before the years 1400, the most number of cookbooks written in the world were written in Arabic?
Really, I didn't.
Yeah, and the number of cookbooks written in Arabic were more than the number of cookbooks written in all other languages of the world stacked up collectively.
That's interesting.
And the fact is that over time, that food culture is still so strong, but I just don't feel it's being celebrated in that way because the Middle East has so much else happening and so much has been lost in conflict. And the tour for us is as much about eating and having fun and keeping things lighthearted as it is about sharing stories of communities that sometimes you only read about in a very negative light in the news. So, for example, we'll begin the tour at our favorite falafel stall where we ask people, where do you think falafels are from? And then we walk them through the politics of that because, of course,
oh, interesting.
Falafels, like everything else in the Middle East, is extremely political. So we talk about that and we actually watch. I think there's so much about you connecting better with your food when you watch how it's made.
Oh, yes.
Why everyone thinks that their mother or their grandmother's food is the best. It's just...
And we all love a story.
Love a story. And you're standing there and you're seeing this visual story unfold of how the guy is actually making these beautiful stuffed falafels. They're giving you a taste right there. So we take these chili and sumac and onion stuffed falafels and we make these falafel sandwiches on the table. So we actually take people into a kitchen and watch how kanafe is made fresh from scratch, like the cheese and the noodle pie.
Oh gosh,
and it's
sounding good.
Served outside, so it's at room temp, or they sometimes places will reheat it in the microwave. That's normal. But when you have it made fresh,
it's something else.
And you're in the kitchen wearing a hairnet and he's pulled this out of the pan.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to eat right then. I mean, the cheese is at its optimal stretchiness at that point.
Yeah.
So we do that. We go to our childhood baklava shop and we talk about all the different kinds of baklava. We also have Arabic qahwa, which is the coffee. We try a very special kind of vegan cream. And we make people guess what is that ingredient that goes in. So spoiler alert, it's not chickpea water, which most people think is not egg white. Obviously, that's not vegan. But it's these lesser known ingredients from the Middle East that people don't even realize are being used here so commonly. So we do that. We take you to our favorite shawarma place and we talk about the history of shawarma. And then we take you to one of my favorite stops, which is like... it's an Iraqi restaurant. And they always ask people, what's the first thought that comes to your mind when you think about Iraq? It's probably not going to be food.
No, it perhaps isn't.
Right? And that's such a tragedy because Iraq was once Mesopotamia.
Yes.
It's one of the most ancient civilizations on the
And food was big. I remember reading about.
Ovens, they have some of the first recipes written on clay tablets, and just, I mean, the only image we have is exactly the image that must have come to your mind when I first said the word.
Yeah.
And so we go in and we talk about, as a incredible author, her name is Anya Siazad. Iraqis are always talking about the flavor of freedom, and for them that flavor is maskouf, and this is incredible fish dish that we actually have at the restaurant. And what's amazing is one day I got an email. She's honestly one of my favorite authors in the world. I got an email one day saying, you know, I'm at the University of Abu Dhabi, would like for my students to come and do your tour. Signed off, Anya.
Wow.
I fell off. I was, I mean, I literally had
You had a huge fan moment.
it was beyond. I was like, I'm not even going to be able to talk on the tour because it's all her words, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, short of drooling, I'm salivating at the moment. And I think that's the tour that I will sign up for sure as a starter.
Love to have you on it.
In your 10-year journey, if you were to go back today, is there anything that you would do differently, Arva, than what you did when you started off?
No, because I think it's better to make the mistakes that you're going to make when you start out and when you're small, and it's not going to hurt as bad when you fall. I've made so many things. I've had everything from handing over cash for rent to a real estate guy for the office and him
taking off.
I mean, who does that? Who hands over cash? I'm not even talking about him running off.
But we've done our fair share of...
Who does that? But that happened even before I opened the company. I'm so happy it happened then, because if that happened with rent now, I mean, so... no, I think all the mistakes are so important to the journey. And whenever I am going through a really rough time where I've really done something that I'm just like, this is hurting me. It's hurting me so badly. What I say is that one day, this will be the masala in my story, right? Like this will be that twist. It has to go up from here, but this will be that really interesting little chunk of masala in my story, and I've got to have it here.
What a fascinating perspective to have. How wonderful. We can go on speaking, but I'm also cognizant of the time, so I'm going to ask you the next question. If there are 3 non-negotiables that you possibly practice more, would you share them with us? What are the things that you do on a daily basis?
I would say my prayer for me is very important. The second is my exercise. And I don't need this to be daily. I need it 3 times a week.
And that does it for you. Yeah.
And it's more a mental thing
right.
for me. And it took me time to get to this place. But I'm glad now that I understand that it is more about the mental side of it than anything else. So that is the second one. And the third one I would say is my time with my little one. For me, I've become very sort of protective about those pieces of time, and I need a little bit of that every day. You know how I am about spending time with her over the weekend. So I realized I'm willing to give up quite a bit to be able to make that work, because again, it's one of those things that not only gives me joy, it makes me feel more human.
Again, I'm not even surprised. Again, uncanny, and yet pretty much the same 3 non-negotiables that I would have said. If there is one particular thing that you could tell every single person in the world, what would it be?
I think it goes back to something we were discussing earlier, which is, and this is especially for women, is value your time for what it's truly worth. And if you don't know what it's truly worth, whatever you think it's worth, multiply that by 1.5 at least to begin with. Because I think we as women, many of us, there are many exceptions, I'm sure, but many of us grossly undervalue our time at the expense of so many things, at the expense of our health, at the expense of our happiness. And I mean this in both a business context and I mean it in a personal context. In a business context, what that means is, are you pricing yourself correctly? I see women around me all the time. they're putting so much in. They squeeze out every hour of their day, yet it's not priced correctly. We often treat our time as the most casual, negotiable, infinite, and often free commodity, when it is exactly the opposite of that, in my opinion. There's a great book by a lady called Eve Rodsky, where she's written Fair Play. And I think every woman needs to read that, and every man needs to read that twice, at least. Because it's all about, are your 2 minutes more precious than my 2 minutes? Yeah. And there's oftentimes signals that we send implicitly in our homes, which show that one person's time is less or more valuable than the other person's time. You know, and this is the thing I say is draw. You know, I'm not talking about being uncompromising or too precious with things, but if you don't know when to say no, or you're giving up too much, after a point, this is going to take a toll on your life, your health.
It's going to catch up.
It's going to catch up. Right.
In the famous words of Deanne Merrichild, a woman is a full circle. Within her is the power to create, nurture, and transform. And Arva, here's wishing you that you continue to expand your circle and continue to transfer. Thank you for coming and speaking to us and sharing your story from the other side.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.